Hey everyone, welcome back to another Where Do We Go From Here? It's Imran Khan again, and I'm super excited today to introduce Luciana Carvalho, who is the co-founder, that's right, co-founder, right? Or founder,
Yes, co-founder.
co-founder and chief marketing officer of MindCheck, which is this incredible company that Luciana will tell you about in just a second. She's also world-renowned keynote speaker who's spoken at South by Southwest, at the Cannes Lion Festival, at TEDx, to just name a few. So really excited to have her here. So welcome, Luciana. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Very grateful for the opportunity. Yeah.
So what I'd love to hear a little bit about, and I think the folks at home would love to hear about, is can you tell us a little bit about MindCheck and um, you know, give us a sense of the type of work that you're doing?
Yeah. So the executive summary and short story is my background's law, business, and then tech startups. So I've had a long journey in looking at innovation, future tech, purposeful tech. And last year, my professional and my personal mission converged, where personally, I had a whole side of me that I never talked about that wasn't very public, which is my mental health journey, where I suffered from depression, from eating disorders, from anxiety since I was about 16, 17. Had a quarter life crisis when I was 24. And, needless to say, have been in and out of therapy, of all kinds of therapy, CBT, psychoanalysis. I've been inpatient, done all the whole ordeal. But it was never something that I was comfortable raising in the workplace, talking about. I felt like it was a sign of weakness, or that eventually I would be judged. And that was sort of my co-founder had a passion project where he has generalized anxiety disorder, has also struggled historically, similar sort of journey, and he digitized a test that looks at it's the depression, anxiety, and stress scale. Looks at those three separately. So it's not an official diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
It simply allows you to, like the name says, check your mind and see if you're showing signs of depressive symptoms, of anxiety, of stress, and you see them separately, and you're able to better understand not only what's going on as a snapshot, but we give you recommendations of what little things you can adopt in everyday life to manage it. So the short version is he started it, like I said, a hobby that eventually led to about 1,000 users a month that come
Wow.
onto MindCheck and do the test. And the catalyst for us really deciding to turn it into a bigger platform in which we can help more people was that over 80% of those reported severe to extreme levels of poor mental health.
Wow.
So we spent the last year validating assumptions, working on the product, and then as it is a software as a service for companies. For individuals, we keep it free and private and frictionless, and our mission is to help as many people as possible to better understand their mental health and what they can do about it. And for the organizations, we think it's a great way to not only reach those who are currently experiencing stress and anxiety, but also be able to provide an assessment for everyone so
Right.
that you can also prevent it if you're able to have a snapshot. And very quickly, what we do is, as well as the first part, which gives you your levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, we developed another holistic assessment that looks at 55 data points from exercise, gut health, sleep, quality of social relationships, how much time you spend in nature, life events, trauma, chronic pain. It's really kind of all completely private. And off the back of it, we'll give you what your top contributing factors. So not only do you have stress or anxiety, but what is causing that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially, we launched the business version in February this year, and COVID has been an interesting time. As you can imagine, we've really kicked off our ability to work not just with sort of bigger companies, but also smaller companies, so we launched a free version of it that's limited, but to support startups and scale ups. As I believe that, mental health, holistic mental health needs to be put into the fabric of every organization.
That's incredible. First of all, I have to say this is such like a really useful tool given the times that we live in. So I'm really excited. So I've been tinkering with it a little bit. So I have a little bit of my own information to share with you around some of my insights that I've gathered from using the product. But I think that, and for the folks at home, I'll be linking to it below, so you can just click right through and check out the actual test. But you brought up this point of COVID, and we're all going through this really crazy time of having lots of emotions around being quarantined at home, or being either far from loved ones, or being quarantined with a loved one that we hadn't spent so much time with in a long time. I think there's lots of different challenges that are going on currently, and I'd really be curious to understand from your vantage point, what has been the impact on people's mental health? What are you seeing through some of the statistics and data that's been coming through MindCheck?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, we were already living through somewhat of a mental health pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
There are ridiculous stats from World Health Organization, and there's a Deloitte report also last year in 2020 say that disability is the leading cause of depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide.
Wow.
It impacts the disability depression accounts for 4% of Europe's GDP in terms of costs. Global economy loses $1 trillion a year to mental illness. If we don't do anything about it, in 2030, it's going to equate to about $16 trillion to the global economy.
Wow.
It's a real impact on across all of society, essentially. And although anxiety disorders, for instance, that accounts to about 14 to 18% of the global population. Obviously, all of this is underreported because there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of discrimination and judgment still. So we feel like the numbers are much greater in practice. But even pre-COVID, about 2 out of 3 people didn't have access to mental health treatment. Wow. So you've got within these enormous numbers, which are underreported, still about 35% actually get access to treatment. And there's a massive gap out there. I think predominantly we talked about the impact on young people beforehand, and that's something that is really crucial to keep in mind. Almost all of mental health conditions start by age 14.
Oh, wow.
So when you have and actually, sadly, suicide has been on the rise, and it's the second leading cause of death for young people aged 15 to 29. So actually, when we take a step back and think about the potential impact of COVID, and we know the impact of COVID in the sense that not just the direct impact of mental health, but the indirect and for instance, the economy and the downturn that we're going in. The likelihood, given previous economic recessions, there's going to be lots of more suicides from despair. From MindCheck's data, what we're seeing is an incredible amount of more than ever. Actually, very much a moment in time. So there was increased stress and anxiety at the beginning, and this kind of fear of flight response that gives you a lot of cortisol and adrenaline, and you need to act. And there's massive anxiety, not just about, and fear for yourself being infected. It's an invisible threat that's out there. And the quarantine and potentially losing your job, potentially losing loved ones or losing loved ones if that happened. There's so many different factors to it. Life as it existed is gone. So we're going through this collective grief of the world as it was, which will never be the same again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's is a beautiful Harvard Business Review with David Kessler talking about this collective grief that we're experiencing in such magnitude that we've never seen, that the world has never been under before. And actually, if we think about the contributing factors that have been popping up from that, they've been a lot of loss of hope and insecure future, dealing with uncertainty, which makes sense. We've got one contributing factor that talks about over-reliance on material values, and that includes social media, which speaks to this massive digital transformation that we've been under. So in our entire, so on one hand, it's two sides of the coin. We're very, very grateful and lucky to have had things like Zoom and video calls and be able to connect. Imagine if this had happened at the beginning of the 20th century.
Right.
It would be a lot harder in terms of social isolation, but also then being on screens all the time does impact your mental health. Right. So social media usage is up, and then coping mechanisms have gone up, like online gambling, substance abuse. Then, like you said, there's inequalities that are popping up, because then all these systemic difficulties of socioeconomic inequalities and predominance of, say, minority ethnic workers that are essential workers and didn't have to stop or couldn't stop working, and were therefore exposed to greater risk, as well as crowded spaces. I'm from Brazil, so we saw a lot of in the favelas. There was increased prevalence of the virus. There's so many things. I could go on forever.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for being so open and sharing so openly about some of your struggles in and around not only founding MindCheck and the reasons that you got there, but also about some of your struggles in the last few months. If it's not too much, I'd love to just ask you a little bit about your experience with the fear of the invisible threat, having gone through, experiencing the virus, and how that's been for you in particular.
Yeah, I was, I guess I could add to my CV, I'm a coronavirus survivor. Weirdly, and I think this speaks to the magnitude of the crisis, in the sense that there's so many unknowns. There's so much that that not even the best experts in the world know about the virus and impact. And from my personal experience and my vantage point, I was traveling, like kind of, the usual. I caught it very early on when I was abroad, and so beginning of March. So as of mid-March, I was in quarantine I live in Lisbon. So I was in Lisbon in an apartment by myself for what ended up being not the average 2 weeks, but nearly 7 weeks of on-off symptoms, where I went through an entire roller coaster of having fever. I had fever for weeks. Then having a bit of a weird, I would describe it better as a panic attack, and which I'd had before. So it was like a tingling and this weird sensations, bodily sensations and aches, which turned into feeling of that shortness of breath, and having to rationally remind yourself to breathe and say, okay, gonna breathe, and which was very scary, especially at night when I was by myself in the apartment, thinking, okay, if I suddenly stop breathing, what then? And it was especially during March when there were so many new cases everywhere, kind of first wave. So you're thinking, if I remember trying to get through to National Health Service, and it was difficult, like it was impossible. I couldn't get through because probably everyone was calling. So you're suddenly in a position where not only you feel very helpless, and thankfully there are incredible services here in Portugal. So I managed to get access to a test, which I know is a privilege in so many places in the world. And I had the test, I was positive. I had a doctor that was calling me throughout and supporting me, but it's a very strange bodily experiences. I lost my sense of taste and smell for about a week and a half. And now I have a weird sensitivity to sugar, which I guess is a good thing
Yeah.
overall, but I don't, not even fruit. I mean,
Yeah.
there's things that I don't even understand still
Yeah.
about my body that have been coming off the back of it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm very, very grateful for that. I think there's a lot of people at home who need to see and understand what some of the ordeals that people have gone through to better understand that this is a very much not just an
Mhm.
existential threat, but something that really has impacted people. Particularly, I look at my home country in the US, and I think not many, or not everyone quite understands how scary this can be. And so I think it's good to talk about it, right? And I think this is another big important component to mental health, right? Is being able to talk about some of these challenges that we have and demystify, destigmify the
Exactly.
you know
And
the
yeah,
go ahead, please, please.
I would add to it. You know, I'm 30 years old. I'm no underlying conditions, very active. My
Mhm.
health, last health check, beginning of this year, was perfectly fine. So it's something that I like to bring awareness to.
Right,
That you know, it's not only those with underlying conditions. It's not in a panic. I don't want to induce panic in people,
right,
obviously.
right, of course not.
But I think it's important to be cognizant of the fact that this is a real thing. It's not going to go away in the next couple of years. It's something that, as in the impact that we're living, will be here from now on. So,
Mm,
and it's about, you know, on one hand, I am grateful that I got it, in the sense that it allowed me, who's a crazy entrepreneur, very you know, passionate about what I'm doing. So I do often have to remind myself to walk the talk and take breaks and have a work-life balance. And
mm,
it really forced me into a complete stop for weeks. So it
mhm.
gave me time to reconnect with myself, where I'm going, my values, what's important to me. And I think that that's happened to a lot of people. So there's many good things also to come out of
Yeah. And I think this
the
segues
crisis.
nicely into the next thing that I'm really curious about after understanding so much of the data that you're looking at for MindCheck. And you've already hinted a bit at this in terms of what's going to be happening in the next couple of years. I'm really curious to get your perspective on what you think the psychological impact is going to be for the short term, long term around this this shared global experience that we're having.
Mhm.
I'm curious to get your perspective on
I think that there's plenty of different uh, pockets of different people that will be impacted, and you know, on one hand, obviously the economy. Um, Everywhere, corporations are suffering enormously, which is kind of the minor issue when we look at the human issue, which is unemployment rates,
that. Right.
poverty, malnutrition. In my home, my native Brazil, there was actually more of a fear around not having enough food and not meeting your basic needs, as opposed to contracting coronavirus, because there's a section of the population that
Mhm.
is highly vulnerable. And you know, add to that healthcare workers that are our heroes and are working, which are our heroes. I say this because I think they not that they didn't sign up for it, and they're on the battlegrounds. And
Mhm.
we really need to rethink, I think, on a macro level, systems that change on how healthcare works.
Mhm.
We've been exhausting our healthcare workers.
Right.
There's increased numbers of depression, of suicide amongst healthcare workers. There's the likelihood that a lot of you know, frontline workers will have some level of PTSD and
Right.
trauma off the back of the crisis. So that's long-term psychological damage from being in the crisis. On the flip side, children who had a complete disruption to their schooling and studies and home life, social life, as well as, you know, in prolonged exposure to toxic and chronic stress from parents and
Mhm.
caretakers. are also something to think about, in the sense that they'll impact their brain health and development.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got so many areas that, what we try to do with MindCheck is look at it holistically, and most of it is being impacted. Sleep, so insomnia has risen
Wow.
since then. There's, I don't remember the exact number, but something along the lines of like 20 something percent of people are eating more as a way to cope with the
Wow.
crisis. And then and if you think about, gyms and your traditional forms of exercise that have been shut down, then you're not getting this holistic balance
Mm-hmm.
of what you need, your sleep and your nutrition and your exercise. And add to that the social disconnection, which I think is, in a like a philosophical way, we one of the key stressors, and if not the highest contributing factor for good mental health, is social connection.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling of belonging, feeling of community, and connection. Touch is very, very important for us as humans. We're tribal beings, we're community beings. And that's exactly what not only has been removed from us, but we are actually at a threat if we get too close to another human being.
Right.
So I think that, from just an ideology perspective, is so threatening to our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And but also an opportunity. On one hand, I like to end on a positive note, in the sense that there's so much that we're going to have to deal with, and we're just at the start of understanding the challenges, short and long term. But there is also an opportunity, I think. None of so many people say, oh, this is the new normal. What is the new normal? And I like to say nothing about the way that the world was operating was normal.
Mm-hmm.
We were exhausted. Stress and anxiety were business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
People were commuting ridiculous hours and
Mm-hmm.
time, and our lives were go go go, especially in like the Western world. So it's also an opportunity for us to literally stop, look at the greater picture, and say, as we're creating not a new normal, but a new reality for us, can
Mm-hmm.
we make it so that it is taking the human into account? It is putting the human at the heart of different industries and at the heart of technology. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's just such an incredible way to think about how we move forward, right? And you know,
Mhm.
again, I was very appreciative of you opening up and sharing your own experience. I mean, just a little bit about my own personal experience through the time around the quarantine. I think of myself as an extrovert, and I was, thinking would be so worried not being around people. And then I was actually faring so well. I was like, oh, I actually am a bit of an ambivert. I can stay, weeks without seeing people. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't okay. Like all of a sudden, I just was incredibly depressed and found myself in a real rut that I hadn't been in quite some time. And I started to deal with a lot of delayed grief from lots of personal things that have transpired in my life. And I think, a lot of what you're telling me is really resonating with me as I'm starting to think through my experience of this. This go, go, go led to this moment of reprieve. But in this moment of reprieve, I also developed a kind of this sense of, what's going to happen next? Where do we go from here? And that actually is what brings
Yeah.
me to my last question is, as you think going forward, as you think about the future, the next, few years or whatever our, new adapted normal will be, what kind of advice do you have to folks out there in terms of, capturing some of the lessons of this time and bringing them forward, and some of the stuff that you're already seeing through MindCheck Me?
Yeah, I think the interesting point is that, and it's something that I love about mental health and guides us, is that there is no one size fits all,
Right.
So we're all, like you were saying about your journey, there's so much common ground between what we're experiencing, but different people experience it in different ways. My depression manifests differently than your depression. You probably need something, I need something else. I think it's the beautiful bit that I would start with is actually self-awareness and
Right.
checking in with your body and mind, and I'm not saying, because I know meditation is not for everyone. Obviously, incredibly helpful. Mindfulness, we all know, kind of, the wellness world. Obviously, very, very helpful. But I wouldn't go so far as say that. I would say actually checking in with honoring your individuality, checking in with who you are, what you need, what are your boundaries inside, even though your living environment, if you live with other people, what are your emotional boundaries and your physical boundaries, and what kind of are you a morning person? Do you dedicate my time? Can you check in and see what is my energy throughout the day? What does it tell me? So I think would venture to say gaining that self-awareness and looking inwards is probably something that for me was immensely helpful during quarantine, and something that, like you were just saying, we are constantly, it's very difficult to do that, very difficult to stop and check in with yourself and be honest about what's going on, and really understand your emotional state. So raising your ability to recognize emotional states is one. Increasing your mental health literacy is important from validated sources, because there's a lot of information out there. But also being able to not to think about, something you do in therapy, understand your limiting beliefs and patterns of thought and things that have been repressed throughout your life. So a lot of mental health issues are a manifestation of something underneath. It'll be either a childhood limiting belief, it'll be attachment issues, it'll be, family tension, relation trauma, and early on, or recent trauma. There's so many different things, because we are the most complex beings out there. So actually trying to get a better sense of what are those triggers for you, what are those patterns. Like, it took me 30 years, but now I know that I can't go, I say I'm a golden retriever. If I go 2 days without doing any kind of exercise, I just have to take myself out for a walk, or else I'll go crazy.
Right.
So it's trying to end. I went through so many years of thinking, I'm a hard worker, work hard, I can sleep when I'm dead, type of thing. Whereas now, I got so much sleep during COVID, I'm like, this is great. Why didn't people tell me about this? So, and now I cannot function if I don't get at least 7 hours of sleep. And I make sure that I just stop. I'll stop, and I'll go, and I won't do whatever it is that I feel like I need to achieve in that day. But I know that I'll be better tomorrow. So all of that, and I would finally add, I mean, there's so many different things to say, but something that's really important, I think it's being we're being cognizant of, is self-compassion, compassion towards others, cultivating that kind of being kind to yourself. We're going through a global pandemic and a global crisis. It's okay if you wake up and you're not feeling 100% and you had to take some time off, and that's fine. And that's something that I think our culture didn't accept, maybe doesn't still accept in certain countries and industries. But it's very important. We have one life, if like we're being faced with it now every day. How do we want to live it? And not saying go to COVID parties and go crazy, but I'm saying, be mindful, be respectful of those around you, of your community. Right. But also think about what don't get bogged down by this feeling of I need to be productive or heads down. And for future generations, hopefully we'll see a future workforce that does prioritize mental and emotional well-being, and looks at employees or individuals as holistic beings. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with me, to have this incredibly insightful conversation. I really hope that the folks at home get a sense of, taking away some of these lessons and ideas, especially around self-compassion with them, because I think that that's just the right way of thinking about this whole situation. So thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate all of you.
Ciao.